I don't know what it is. Okay, so it says that we are live. So if you guys want to share it from your pages, you can at this time.
Okay.
And then
Can I do it from the phone?
it shortly.
I guess so.
Do you see it
Let's
live on
see.
my page?
I'm gonna. Oh
Um,
wow.
yeah.
Okay.
It says friends only. Can you make it public?
Let me see what I could do.
I just sent it to my sister in her inbox. Well, she asked me to send it that way. Why am I looking up?
Let me see if I can do it.
Oh, do you see Eliza?
You know what? I don't know if I can. Actually, hold on.
Why are you? Is that coming up? My goodness. Oh, I know what happened.
Okay, it's public
Okay.
now.
Okay. So I'll give you guys a second. So I'll let a few people come in, and then we can start by introducing ourselves and get this conversation going. Hey, everybody who has already joined us. We are really excited about this discussion. So go ahead, share this, tag your friends, your followers, and get ready to talk. We want this to be open. We want everybody's input. If you are already here and you want to say hello, we would love to hear you say hello. We want to see who is here. Drop a comment, and we'll get going as soon as we get a few people who've joined us, a few comments, and so we can have a nice open discussion. My name is Simone Lachey. For those who don't know me, I am a mental health advocate. I'm the founder of a Sound Mind, a faith-based mental health organization based in Connecticut. And I have Cheryl and Nicole with me, and they are really, really awesome in the mental health field. So if you guys want to go ahead and just introduce yourselves as well.
Hello, I am Cheryl Lynn. I am a licensed therapist, and I have a private practice here in Connecticut. I provide telehealth video sessions, and I am a mental health advocate as well. I love talking about all things mental health.
My name is Nicole. I am a suicide prevention, anti-bullying, and cyber safety solutionist. I run a blog called Conquer with Nicole. I have a nonprofit called Not on My Watch, and everything I do centers around suicide prevention, anti-bullying, and cyber safety. I mainly work with moms of teens and tweens, but I also work with other people as well. Glad to be here.
Thank you all. Are you guys getting any feedback, or is that just me? You guys hear?
We're hearing feedback.
You hear feedback? Too?
It sounds
I
like
don't hear any.
potato chip bags.
How does it sound now?
It sounds like what?
Because I think it might be. Let me
I can. Hello. Okay, I don't hear anything now.
You sound muffled.
Do you feel good? I sound muffled. Okay. Let me see. Get my headphones. But Cedric, yeah, you can ask questions if you want to comment questions. or comments or anything on anything that's said, you can do so. But let me go find um, some headphones and see if that works a little bit better. Um, and then I'll come back. Hold on. Yeah, any technical advice would be great. But give me 2 seconds. I'm trying to get my headphones together. Let's see. These things are never. Internet delay. Oh. Okay, so should I just move to another area? Maybe I should do that. Okay, so now I have my headphones on. Is that any better? Or is it still muffled? It's better? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Cedric. Very helpful. Let me get the light on in here. All right. So I think we're good to start. Everybody's introduced themselves. We've got a few people in here. You guys, you guys can go ahead and ask anything. I'm gonna just start by talking about my experience, and if these ladies want to share their experience as well. From some of us are coming from a more personal perspective. Some of us are coming from a more professional perspective. Some people are coming to learn about the spiritual perspective over anything. So we're here to talk about it all, but I'm going to go ahead and start about with why I chose to have this discussion and why this means so much to me. I forgot my water, but I'll go grab that in a minute. I want to say that thank you for everybody for being here. And this is just going to be a very open, transparent, vulnerable conversation. I know when we start talking about suicide, there's a lot of vocabulary that you're supposed to use. There's a lot of things that you're like do's and don'ts. And with this conversation, I just want to be kind of comfortable without trying to I don't want to, impose my trauma on anybody else or anything like that. I don't want it to be a trauma dumping session. I don't want it to be a triggering session, but I just want to kind of share my heart and some of the things that I've been through. So, yes, well, the reason, the whole basis of why I founded my organization a few years ago is because of my struggles, especially when I had attempted suicide this last time, which was many, many years ago. But after that, I saw how um, especially people in the Black community and people of faith responded to me being in crisis. So I always mention when I talk about the beginning and the birth of this organization about how when I attempted suicide. I ended up in the hospital, the actual hospital. Then I was taken to a behavioral facility. So it was no secret. I didn't want to tell anybody that I was there, what I had done, and things like that. But because of the severity of the situation, I ended up having to share that with family members and friends, and so people knew. And so when I was transferred to the behavioral facility, there's a whole process and things. There's ins and outs of mental health when you're dealing with a crisis. So when I first got transferred to the facility, you can only get a certain amount of visitors, and I didn't really have access to a lot of people. I don't think I had my phone. I don't believe I had my phone, so I didn't have access to a lot of people. So I had limited visitors, but the first visitors that came to see me, the first visitors that came to see me, one of the first things that was said was, "Do you know if you would have actually killed yourself? If you kill yourself, you're going to hell." And I'm like, what? Like, I just was in, like, there was this whole thing. I just about almost died. And I was just in such despair. I was in such a dark, depressed place. I had grew up in church and I've heard these things before, but that's not the first thing that you want to hear when are in that place, especially when you're in a facility. The first thing that you want to hear is not that, you almost went to hell. Like, that's not what you want to hear. And so I think that people who are in church are so misguided a lot of times and miseducated around mental health and mental illness and things like that, because out of ignorance. And I think there's so many things that are said that's harmful, more harmful to our people than helpful. And I think these conversations need to be had more, because there's so many people that are in such a dark place, that are struggling. And we can't necessarily go to the church. We don't always feel like we can go to the church as a place of refuge, as a place to find peace, because people are so miseducated. So that's actually why I decided to start having these conversations a few years ago, because I noticed, just as I had these struggles, and still do have these struggles, and we'll talk about that too. Other people are having them too. Other people are having them, and they're having them often. So that's why I wanted to have this conversation. And I know, Cheryl and Nicole, you guys have your own personal reasons about why this conversation is important to you. So if you guys want to share that, and I'm going to read the comments and I'm going to respond to some of the questions and feedback we got before. But if you guys want to share first, and then we will start addressing the other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I was just, I was intrigued when I saw you post the Facebook Live discussion, because this has been a topic of interest for me for a very long time, in terms of, the idea of being saved and walking with, having that faith walk, and then suffering with, with depression, and leading, which would lead up to, in most cases, suicidal ideation or suicidal attempts. And I think, like, to your point, um, the church community is not as forgiving, or not, they don't know how to generally respond to someone in a crisis. And I think my interest for this discussion today, or this evening, is to really emphasize the importance of being able to utilize all resources that are available to you, right? Um, and what I mean by resources is that you can have this whole pot of resources, where you are tapping into your community, your church community. You're still, trying to pursue your faith walk, but then you're also, I always encourage, to reach out for professional help as well. And I just want to highlight that when we think about the idea of transformation, when we think about the faith walk, the whole point of that is trying to transform your heart. But that doesn't include behavior modification and mental health therapy, counseling, potentially medication if necessary, which is another piece of, the whole package. So I just want to emphasize that we really just need to destigmatize the idea that you can't have the best of both worlds. You can do both, and it's highly encouraged to have what some people might say Jesus in therapy, you know, um, and to be able to utilize those resources and just get the help that you need, because you're literally in a crisis. So I want to emphasize the importance of therapy along with your faith walk.
So, I grew up in the church. I've been in the church my whole life. And one thing I can say, I did not find help in the church. And I was traumatized by the way that people in the church dealt with me because of what I had going on mentally. I was demonized. I was told that I was demon possessed. I was told that I didn't have enough faith. I was told that I should be delivered by now. The list goes on. And so, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about doing what I do is because I want people in the church to know that your brain is a part of your body, and nobody has the right to discredit what's going on with you mentally. And it's so funny because when people have other illnesses like cancer, they're heroes, and everybody applauds them for fighting. And oh my goodness, you're so strong and you're so powerful, and we're all going to pray for you every day and every night. And we're going to get out here and we're going to call you up to the altar, and we're going to pray over you, and we're going to root for you while you fight this. But when it comes to people with mental illness, they don't get the same treatment. They're made to feel like they're less than. They're made to feel like they're weaker. They're made to feel like, "Well, why is this getting to you? Why is this bothering you so much?" And so, one thing that I do within the church is I advocate very strongly for people with mental illness. And I believe that mental illness should be respected, quote unquote, the same way that physical illness is.
Absolutely, absolutely agree with you both. Like therapy has been such an impactful part of my recovery. And Nicole, like you said, I had a similar and still do have similar encounters with people of faith who they might not as much say that I don't have as much faith as them, or I might not be as saved as them, but I feel like they say these things, these roundabout things that make it sound like you're looking down on um, my walk with Christ, or my, the level of faith that I have as compared to the level of faith that you might have. And you're right, it's not respected necessarily as to the same amount as a physical ailment. People don't say, just your mind is an organ, your brain is an organ, and mental illness, is the illness of your brain. And people don't necessarily put that together, but it is an important part of the conversation. You don't talk about diabetes and you don't talk about cancer and things like you do about depression. And there's people who are literally out here dying from depression. The people are dying from depression that are sitting in our pews, that are singing in the choir, that are watching our kids and teaching them in Bible class, and we're not addressing it. We're just not addressing it. And like you said, when you are working on something physical, when you're working on another physical ailment, like mental illness is a physical illness. But when you're talking about something else, you're celebrated. When you are dealing with depression, a lot of times you are just not looked at the same way. The language is just different. If you really pay attention, the language is different, and it's hurtful. It's hurtful. It makes the walk that much harder, that much darker, because while church should be a place that you can run to, you always don't feel safe when you're going to people who don't understand what you're going through, or look down, on your struggle in comparison to other struggles. Somebody has told me so many things, like, you have so much to be grateful for, and all these things. Like, when you really don't understand depression, you just don't address it, certain ways. And so it's harmful. So we need to have these conversations. But Cedric, I did read your comment. I don't know if anybody else wants to address it. Can you guys read comments, or you want me to read it out loud?
I'm about to find it.
Okay. but I definitely related to the comments. I'll read it.
Okay.
My friend sent me this. It's hard to tell the people I love that I want to die. So I spent a lot of time and energy pretending to be normal. When I ended up in the hospital, it was almost a relief because I didn't have to act for anyone anymore. I just cried all day and no one took it personally. No one wanted to blame themselves. I could cry and it didn't hurt anyone's feelings. The honesty was refreshing, but then I started to look it cuts off after that, Cedric. But I definitely can relate to that.
Oh,
So
wait,
I
I
can speak
can
to it.
read the rest of it.
Okay, okay.
I started to look at the other patients around me. I was surrounded by people who had been miserable their whole lives. There was an 80-year-old woman there who had been in and out of psych wards since she was my age. She stared into space all day crying, and every day she would look at me and ask, "Why won't they just let me die?" And I didn't have an answer. And I realized that was my future. I understood with perfect clarity that I was never going to get better. No therapy can help me, no medication can fix me. I can make everyone think I'm normal, that I'm coping, that I'm okay. But I've never been okay. I'll never be okay. I will always be one bad day away from killing myself until I'm dead. I spend my life trying to delay what I know is inevitable, and any day could be my last.
Okay, so he said he wanted that broken down. I don't know where do you want to start? What I will say first is like when I read the beginning, I could definitely relate to it. When I was in the facility, I said it was kind of a vacation for me. It is not the fun place to be. Do not get it messed up. And I was very definitely blessed to be in the facility that I was in at the time that I was in it. But that is something that a lot of people with depression they feel a lot of those similar feelings. I know I was talking to somebody recently, um, and we were talking about, I think me and Nicole, we did with another young lady, Tamu, we did a nice discussion on youth mental health and suicide prevention last week, and we hit a few of these things. But sometimes the people that are closest to you, you don't necessarily feel comfortable coming to. That's why it's important to have a safe person that you can go to, whether it be as an adult, whether it be like a therapist, or whoever that person might be for you. But sometimes it's hard to go to people around you. You don't want to feel like a burden. You don't want to make them feel like they did something wrong and things like that. So it is tough. So I don't know if you guys have any tips or any input that you would want to add to that.
What stuck out for me, this post is riveting, but it does paint an accurate picture of someone who's struggling with suicide. Um, one thing that stuck out for me was, the part where this person states that no therapy can help me. And that is, when someone is feeling severely depressed and their coping mechanisms are depleted and they've lost all hope in that very moment, that's exactly what it feels like to a person. Um, because at that moment you're in a crisis mode and you need to be stabilized and brought back to whatever normal looks like. So I think I'm interested in that part, um, because I do think when we talk about outpatient therapy, which is the lowest level of therapy for mental health services that you can get, yes, you do need to be able to be stabilized, and you need to be able to participate in one-on-one therapy. Um, and but I'm intrigued by that comment. Like I guess I would like to know more about that part, and what did therapy look like when you tried it with whomever, and what worked, what went well, and what didn't go well. And so I think that's bringing up more questions for me, but I do understand when a person is at that point and nothing it feels like nothing can help in that moment.
So for me, I 100% understand. And especially the part about therapy. I've been in therapy since I was 23. I'm about to be
Mm,
37. And I wanted to
mhm.
kill myself less than a week ago. Because for some people, suicidal ideation does not ever go away, but you have to learn how to deal with it. And so I think in terms of help, we have to have realistic expectations about what help is. So it may not be that when you go to therapy, you're magically okay and you never want to kill yourself again and you're never sad again and you never go into a depression. That's an unrealistic expectation when you have a mental illness because for me, because I have complex PTSD, I have literal brain damage. My brain literally does not work the way it used to work. And it's going to take years of doing certain things to get it back to something. And it may never be normal again. So, therapy for me is learning how to deal with where I am, learning how to cope with what I've gone through, and learning how to keep myself safe in times of crisis. And I think one thing that we have to do as people, and especially people who advocate for mental health, we have to be realistic about what help means. We have to be realistic about what okay means. Because I tell people that I talk to all the time, you may be suicidal tomorrow, but I'm going to know that I did my job if when you're suicidal tomorrow, you call the hotline instead of getting on Facebook and saying you're going to jump off a bridge. You may be suicidal next week, but if you click on your Not Okay app and tell your mama, your daddy, and your sister instead of locking yourself in a room, I'm going to feel much better about the work that I did. And so I think we just have to be realistic about the fact that some people are going to live with mental illness for a long time. Just like people live with diabetes, they live with morbid obesity, they live with high blood pressure, they live with a lot of stuff. It's no different, but we have to set realistic expectations and just be willing to do whatever we can do to be okay. Whatever okay is for us, because okay for me may not be okay for Simone, may not be okay for Miss Cheryl. It's all different for different people. I'm done.
That was great. That was great. You covered so much. Thank you. But with you saying that, I also want to um, talk about a little bit about, like you said, you were feeling suicidal last week. And I say, when I talk about my journey, that I still do deal with suicidal ideations at times, but that doesn't mean that you're actively suicidal. Does anybody know how to, can you talk a little bit about the difference? Cheryl, Nicole, I don't know which one. Nicole.
I'm gonna let Miss Cheryl take this one.
And can you repeat the question?
I said, so Nicole mentioned, she was feeling suicidal last week, and
Hmm.
when I talk
Hmm.
about my mental health journey, my personal mental health journey, I
Hmm.
will sometimes talk about how I still do deal with suicidal ideations,
Hmm.
but there's a difference between, I think, being, I don't want to mess up the vocabulary, but having suicidal ideations and being actively
In a crisis.
suicidal.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, yes. Suicidal ideation is, the constant thinking about, the idea of ending your life. It doesn't always necessarily mean that you have a plan in place when you have
Right.
suicidal ideation. So, you know, as a therapist, for me, and I can speak for others, we're usually looking for the intensity of how often you're thinking about suicidal thoughts, or is it starting to lead to where you're starting to plan out how you're going to end your life, and then also just assessing whether a person is in a safe environment, and what do they have access to, like kind of trying to understand what does that potential plan look like, and then just really assessing their coping skills, like what has happened, because a lot of times, and I'm interested, Nicole, when you said you had those thoughts last week. Um, I know a lot of times events are triggered, right? But if you're dealing with PTSD, which is something that is chronic and it's something that just develops, it's like a long pattern of series of events. Um, I think that, when we talk about like events trigger, suicidal ideation. Maybe just relationships, um, the relationship with yourself, uh, potentially could be a constant trigger for you. Um, so there's so many different scenarios to consider, but there is a big difference between suicidal ideation. It doesn't always warrant a call to 911 when someone says they are thinking of killing themselves. So those are my thoughts.
I agree. And I think, we have to, one thing I learned in my training, because I have like every suicide prevention training there is, like
Mm.
assist, mental health first aid, QPR, you name it. Your girl was like, let me get all this stuff so I can help myself, help everybody else too. And so one thing that I always tell people, like, you need to ask the question, like, what do you mean? Are you saying you want to kill yourself today? Are you saying you want to kill yourself on your birthday? Like, what are you saying? And I know for me, what triggers me is working. So like if I have a lot of work to do, it triggers me because I'm like, I can't even think the way I used to think because this has happened to me. And if that hadn't happened to me, I would have been able to do this in 15 minutes. And now it's going to take me 2 hours because I got to convince myself that I'm worthy enough to have it. Then I got to convince myself that I'm smart enough to do it. Then I have to convince myself that I'm worth the time. Then I have to convince myself that the people going to listen to me once I do it. And by the time I do all that, I'm ready to go to bed because I'm like, this is too much convincing and too much talking. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm not doing this foolishness. It does not even matter. I do not care. I'm about to end all of this stuff because this is just too much. You know what I'm saying? And so knowing that about myself, that's how I'm able to like not like go over the edge per se, but it's still very much a real thing. And one of the reasons that I'm so transparent about it is because people are taught to just push their thoughts down, like the whole toxic positivity movement. Just be grateful. Just find 10 things to be grateful for. And it's like once I finish being grateful, my brain is still telling me to kill myself. Like that doesn't it's not a fix all cure all, you know what I'm saying? And so one of the reasons that I'm so transparent is because I want people to be transparent as well. That's the only way you can help. I know when I go to therapy, my therapist doesn't ask me, "How are you feeling?" She's like, "Okay, what made you mad this week? What made you sad? What made you happy? Who did you help? Who did you hurt? What shows made you know what I'm saying? Like it's real questions. And so I think it's very important that we talk more, you know what I'm saying? About our own stuff and that we empower other people to talk more about theirs in safe spaces because you can't talk everywhere. But when places are safe, people need to come on in and talk, and we need to let them talk.
For sure. And that's why I like to have these conversations that are more like chill and laid back, because people want real talk. They want real, unfiltered, raw talk where they can come and they can be safe and they can say, oh, I'm having these thoughts, and we can come and we can address it, accordingly. Because those types of things should definitely be it should be discussed with a professional, but you should also be able to have peers that you can go to and be supported. Um, so that's why I definitely like having these conversations. Like you said, Nicole, it's really tough. Like as soon as you're triggered, it's like back to back to back, just overflow, flood of thoughts, like back to back thoughts, and one leads to the next. And I found myself in a dark place. I wouldn't say I was necessarily suicidal. I was more so depressed recently, and that's how it goes. It starts with a thought, and that's why I had to start challenging my thoughts. It's different levels for different people, but I had to start challenging my thoughts because like I had posted before, somebody had said when we were talking about anxiety is just because a thought comes doesn't mean it comes to serve you. Your thoughts can come and you can dismiss them. You don't have to take every thought for face value. Every thought is not a fact. So I had to learn to kind of, for me, just go through my thought like, this is a lie, this is a lie, this is a lie, and just keep saying, this is a lie, this is not true. What is true? But it really depends on what where you're at and what works for you, and that's why it's important to have a therapist that will help you kind of narrow down, what's going to be your go-to coping skill, what's going to be your safety plan, because like she said, it's not a one size fits all thing, but we can help each other by being educated, by educating ourselves, and by um, really being aware of the people around us. Suicide prevention it's a community effort. It's everybody's responsibility, and we don't want to lose people from suicide. We always say, when somebody lose somebody from suicide, we're all upset, and we didn't see the signs and things like that. But I think we need to be way more aware, way more aware. There's so many people that I see suffering in silence, especially right now. There's people that we're losing, and we can't keep using the excuses we didn't see the signs. We can't keep using that as an excuse when we're not being aware of the person next to us. They say check on your strong friend, check on your strong friend, check on your weak friend, check on your friend that's laughing, your friend that's crying, your friend that's isolated herself or himself. We have to continue, to check on each other. It's Suicide Prevention Month. So that's why I thought it was important to have this conversation, but I wanted to be ongoing. Speaking of Nikki, I don't know why I called you Nikita, but Nikki Powell Cotman, I brought her comment up, active versus passive suicidal ideation. That's what we were just talking about. She just put a perfect, put that perfectly. That's what we were just talking about. But we are going to do a part two. She is the founder of Rally Up Magazine, and she is very passionate about this cause as well. Me and Nicole, we had already talked about we're going to do another round of the youth, talking about youth mental health and suicide prevention. We're just going to keep this conversation going. Hopefully, we're going to do this conversation on Clubhouse. Like, it's going to be a whole movement and get all this out here. But I'm glad that everybody has joined us today. I do want to get back to Cedric's comment. I want to go in order. I see that you responded to Laquanda, but let me go back to Cedric. Okay, so I've been in three kind of instant response situations, mainly because I was in her A in college and they gave us ground rules on asking direct questions. But I also became friends with certain individuals, with people who I never met. But conversation in that moment, when you think, is this person suicidal? How do you help? Let's see. Oh, you guys both responded to Laquanda. Okay, cool. Does anybody want to say anything else to Cedric? Add to Cedric?
I would just say, you always have the hotline in your phone. And I tell everybody this. You should have the suicide prevention lifeline in your phone, period, dot. You should know if you have my mobile crisis in your area. You should have the crisis text line in your phone because you may not know what to say. If somebody comes to me right now and says, my husband just killed my kids and I can't relate to that, I'm going to have to call in somebody else. You know what I'm saying? And it's okay to say, I don't know how that feels. I cannot imagine. I cannot imagine, but let's figure it out. Let's talk to somebody, and with the hotline, you can call the hotline for somebody or you can call the hotline with somebody. So I would just say, make sure that you are being direct and that you're involving help. There are times when people call me and they are suicidal and they are single parents. I'm not the parent of anyone. So I would say, hold on. I got the suicide part. I'm going to call my friend. She got the single parent part, and we going to figure it out. You know what I'm saying? Because what you also have to remember, some suicide comes from mental illness, and some suicide is situational. Somebody may come home and see that their life savings were stolen, and they may want to kill themselves. And they may have no history of mental illness anywhere, but that situation just has them thinking that this is the end, you know? So when you're dealing with people, you really need to take the time to figure out what is going on, because it could be something as simple as, let's get you a support group. Let's get you some people who have been through taking care of their mama with Alzheimer's. And let's get you a safe place where you can go and vent about that. And then you won't have all these feelings pent up. You know what I'm saying? Because keep in mind, it's not yourself that you want to kill. It's how you feel. It's the response that you have to whatever is going on. So sometimes as a friend and as an ally, we have to deal with what is going on with the person and let what the person is telling us direct us to how we handle it. Miss Cheryl,
Okay, did we lose Simone? Yeah, I
she's
want to
coming back.
add, yeah, I liked everything that you said in terms of you broke down, where for some people it is a situation. So, you're looking at what are the events that just happened. And then for others, it is a mental illness, it's genetic, it's something that they've just been dealing with their entire life. Um, and and it is important to kind of find out what is happening, and to determine whether this is something that's a part of a person's history, medical history, or whether or not it is an event, or it could be a sequence of events, So I mean, even right now, I think we're in a very sensitive, we have what we're all going through right now collectively, has, I think, heightened mental illness and definitely increased suicidal ideation because it's continuous, it's constant trauma that's just happening on a daily basis. So that's like an example of something that we can look at together and say, yes, these are not really great living conditions right now. So people's ability to just manage life right now, it's going to take some extra effort. And I like how you explained how you have your dialogue with yourself. I was thinking, like, when you were kind of talking about how you talk to yourself, I'm like, she's talking herself off the ledge, like literally. So it's a lot of work and it's exhausting,
Very.
right? You got to have the
Very.
strength and you've got to have the will to even talk to yourself.
It's not easy. It's definitely,
Hmm.
definitely for me learned, but like legit, like it with depression and anxiety. Like I just, the more I try to get word in me, and I keep telling myself, this is the devil saying this to you. This is the devil saying this to you. This is not fact. People do love you. You do have. I'm trying to think of some of the things that I think of. You do matter. People do love you. What you do is important. Your life has purpose. Different things that I have to tell myself. And it's not even like you just tell yourself that and you just believe it. It's not that easy. But like your mind has so much to do with trying to get some kind of control over your mind, is so important. Not letting your mind take over because it can try to take over. Um, just trying to get that, it's just another level. But also, I am on medication for mental illness, for bipolar. Um, so that is definitely very helpful in my case. It's helpful for some, not helpful for others, but I know for me, it helps kind of keep the edge off. And it's a great tool. And even that was a thing when that's a whole nother topic. We're gonna wrap up, but that's a whole nother topic when we get into medication and being a Christian, like psychotropic meds. That was a big deal for me, because people say you should have faith, and I felt like I had less faith because I was taking medication. So I would stop taking my medication. I would go to these conferences. I would try to pray harder, and do all these different things. And like I just needed to get right back on my medication. I ended up being in another situation. I needed to get right back on my medication. So, it's not always a lack of faith thing. Sometimes it is literal chemical imbalance. So those are just things that we have to consider. But all in all, Cedric, I would say just being that person that people can lean on, not letting people lean too much on, like not being a pushover or anything or being manipulated, but having transparent conversations, being real and raw with that person, and also sending them the proper resources is definitely helpful. Sending them even Psychology Today so they can find therapists that they can talk to regularly, or I have the suicide line posted. Thank you so much, Nikki, because I couldn't figure out how to put to comment. So thanks for putting it up there. She just had the call line, and then I just put up the text line right now too, referring people to resources that can help them, who are trained, resources, people who are trained to help them, is really, really, really beneficial, because we can't take it on all ourselves. As friends, as family members, we can't take it on. We can be there for that person. We can be supportive and encouraging, checking in on that person, but we can only do but so much. So we have to help people by equipping them with the tools that we have around us that we can reach. So yes, like she said, put the text lines in your phone, the text line, the hotline in your phone. Nicole, you mentioned mobile crisis. If we can just touch on that really quickly as well, having a mobile crisis, if you can talk about it, you are more, you're better talking that than I am, because I haven't even done it in my area, to be completely transparent. But you mentioned it last week.
So am I okay? So I'm anti calling the police when there's a mental health crisis. And that's not because I'm anti police necessarily, but I'm anti calling the police because like I'm anti calling the fire department if someone needs a cake made. Like, you know, police aren't necessarily trained in mental health crises. So I always tell people
Yeah.
find out if there's a mobile crisis in your area, because people in mobile crisis are trained in mental health crises. So you go to Google, you type in mobile crisis, you type in your county, and it'll come up and it'll tell you, let me do it because I haven't done it in a while. It'll tell you like if there is mobile crisis. So in my county, it says mobile crisis team 24 hours a day. It's got a phone number. It says we can provide service for anybody in crisis, suicidal or depressed people, people with homicidal ideations, domestic violence, emergency petitions, delusional and psychotic persons, death notifications, links to mental health services, links to detox, family and marriage conflicts. And the only thing that they cannot do is take somebody away without their consent. So, like, if your family member is like going through something, they're not gonna come get them and take them nowhere, but they will help them where they are. And I think it's important to remember that because so many people with mental illness end up being killed when we call the police because either they have a weapon, they start charging at the police. You have people who die by suicide by cop. It's just all of that. So in my humble opinion, to avoid all of that, see if you have mobile crisis in your area because these people
Mm.
are specifically trained. They are these specialists. They're specifically trained to come to your house in the middle of the night and talk somebody off the ledge. So definitely, and I live in a very rural part of North Carolina, and we have mobile crisis. So most counties who are,
Mm.
of a good size, they're gonna have it.
Thank you. That's really,
You're
really helpful.
welcome.
So hopefully that helps. Stefan, thanks for joining us. Yes, the stigma of medication. We're doing better, somewhat, with the medication stigma, with the mental health stigma, but then also there's the conversation of how are we going to break the stigma and not make mental health a trend too. That's a whole nother thing, making mental health and mental illness a trend. Um, that's been a whole other thing. But I think we covered a lot today. I think we can get so much more in depth with this conversation, but I want to save some for part two. Going to let's see, Fashawn, going to Nicole's statement about the church. Are the comments coming from churchy people always based on not aware or recognizing you are in a crisis situation, or just plain ignorance?
I would say that church people are taught to regurgitate information because if you think about it, what you're taught in church is when you're going through this, say this scripture. When you're sad, quote these scriptures. When somebody dies, quote these scriptures. So when they see somebody in crisis, they just do what they were taught to do. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And when you get finished telling me that, I'm still crying because something is wrong with me. You know what I'm saying? And I don't necessarily think they mean any harm. I just think that a lot of times we do what we were conditioned to do. But I'll let Miss Cheryl chime in because she might have something on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's passive. It's a passive response, to just pray or quote scriptures, not to take anything away from the scriptures or the word of God, but it is passive and there's no action behind prayer. I mean, prayer is an action in itself, but to just quote scriptures or to just pray or to just, like you said, refer to those scriptures, like you said, joy comes in the morning. It does, right? If you can see that, it has to do with your ability to think differently, to change your perspective, right? So it's and like you said, they're just doing what they were taught. And I think in regards to the church community, I do think that this issue is going to be a continued discussion. I think it's probably the biggest barrier that we have in front of us, when we're trying to educate people about mental illness and to just destigmatize this. It's a medical issue, just like physical health. That's why I like to differentiate between, I like to say physical health versus mental health, but they're both medical issues and they
Mm-hmm.
should be treated the same. But yeah,
Absolutely.
prayer is just passive, in my opinion.
I think, yeah, and I always, as
Mhm.
I've continued talking openly about this, especially
Yeah.
in um, faith-based circles, I have a few things have come to me, but like you said, it's passive. Like when you ask somebody if they're okay, and they don't look like they're okay, but yeah, blessed and highly favored. Like you might want to ask a few more questions. Nicole talked about that earlier. Is asking the right questions. Um, Show that you care. Like if somebody says they're gonna pray for me, that's very passive. That does nothing for me necessarily. Prayer is good, but if you take a moment to actually pray with the person, that makes that much more of a difference. If you're actually praying with that person, if you actually take that moment out to talk to somebody and check in on them and things like that, if you're backing what you say with actions, then that's a little bit more helpful as opposed to just I'll pray for you or just shooting them a scripture. Um, and I'm not going to say the Bible doesn't help. I'm not going to say church doesn't help. I'm going to fellowship, all those things, at the proper time, proper place. Those are all helpful. But it has to be, more to it, especially when somebody's dealing with, deep depression. So they want to feel included. So we can go to church and there be a bunch of people and you still feel by yourself. You have a bunch of people around you who love you and you still feel so alone. You feel like nobody cares about you. Those are real feelings. Those are real feelings. And that's what a lot of people who live with depression, who live with anxiety, who live with bipolar, PTSD, these things, that's what they are facing. And so we just have to learn to be just that much more compassionate, that much more loving. Like we can be cold as people, and everybody's going through their own things. And that's something else that I had to realize. They might not have reached out to me. Like there was somebody who didn't reach out to me, for example, recently, and they didn't reach out to me. And I was like, you know what? Let me check on this person. I was feeling like I had a hard day. The next day, I was feeling a little better. So let me reach out, or tell them how I was feeling, and come to turns out that they were dealing with stuff too. Everybody is dealing with stuff right now, so we just have to be super aware of the people around us, especially our loved ones. We want them to be around, and we don't want to lose people to this. Suicide is preventable. We don't want to lose people to preventable death, so we definitely just have to be more aware. There's so many other things going on out there that is taking lives, and we don't want it to be our own family members and friends that are taking their own lives. But with that, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. Um, I don't know if Cheryl and Nicole have anything to say that they want to add before we close. I look forward to doing this discussion again. I hope that somebody learned something. Definitely give me feedback for future discussions, and we can keep having these conversations. But suicide, especially, I feel like isn't like we'll talk about stuff, but I feel like right now suicide isn't talked about enough, and it's happening too often, and it's getting dangerous out here. And I think the people just need to be more aware. So I want to have this
Yeah.
discussion some more.
I mean, the only thing I would add is I've seen some posts on social media, and I know that there's a concern with being able to be transparent, like Nicole has mentioned, like especially when you think about the idea of talking to a therapist. I think people, there's always that disclaimer that that a therapist will provide and say, this session or everything that we discuss is going to be confidential
Mm,
unless there's reason to believe that you might be um, in threat of harming yourself or harming someone else. That disclaimer is always provided. It should be provided at the beginning of a conversation, and I think that piece is where it kind of gets in the way of someone really just saying, I need some help, and I don't want to be worried about you having to call 911,
mm,
or to make a phone call. I just really need some, and I think that's the piece that I would like to explore more, because I do think that's an issue. And I don't think people should be afraid to talk to a therapist and tell them exactly what is going on without being criminalized, I guess. I guess that's probably, I think that happens to people where it ends up, it just ends up turning into, it causes more harm than good, right?
mm-hmm.
Like,
I
so
hear
some
you.
people won't come for help because, and it also depends on who the therapist is, right? That's a whole nother discussion. So it depends on who the therapist is. There's cultural issues that could come into play. So you definitely have to know who it is that you're talking to, or getting ready to enter into a therapeutic relationship with. Because, and I don't want to just, really hone in on the cultural differences, but that does play a role in determining what is the outcome going to look like for this person. But that's a whole nother subject that we could probably talk about. Um,
I'm glad you brought that up, though. That's good.
yeah, yeah. So
Mhm.
those are my final comments.
Well, Simone, thank you for having me. We have to do this again.
For sure. For sure. This was a
Like,
great conversation.
I feel the love. I feel the camaraderie. I feel the everything. So we have to do this again. It was amazing.
We definitely will. Definitely will. Thanks to everybody who
Yeah,
joined us. Thanks, Nicole, for your time. Thanks,
yeah,
Cheryl, for your
yeah.
time.
Thank you.
And
Yes.
I'm looking forward to having this conversation again pretty soon. So, you guys, everybody who
All
stopped
right.
in, thank you so much. Everybody who's watching the replay, take care of yourselves. And I'm gonna post some. I'm gonna keep posting my suicide prevention tips that we can help yourself. You can help others, and so hopefully we'll save some lives out here. But y'all take care of yourselves. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you.
All right, bye.